Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Pieware Homeschool Masterclass. Tonight we're featuring Tony Deyo. Tony, thanks for being on with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
This is
Tony's
exciting.
been a Pieware user for 15 plus years.
Yep.
Wonderful designer. He's been all over the place from Virginia to Texas and New York. So
Yeah.
um, we know you're a comedian as well,
Yes.
quite accomplished. Can you give us a little bit of your background, how you started writing drill, what got you into drill writing, and then what got you into comedy?
All right. So I went to James Madison University. I'm sporting the cap tonight. And I was getting a bachelor's degree in music education. I ended up going out. I had a lot of friends that were a few years ahead of me at JMU, but they were marching with the cadets of Bergen County. And I ended up going up and auditioning for the cadets. And I played in the pit, but was very interested in the drill design of it. And because I've always sort of been good with math and geometry and all that stuff. And it was really intriguing. And the time Mark Sylvester was writing the drill for us, and at the time he was still doing it on pencil and paper. And so you could sit there and he'd be at a cafeteria table and be sketching out the drill, and it was really amazing to me. And so the next summer after drum corps, I just decided that was what I was going to try to do. And it's almost like comedy where you have to tell people that's what you do before they let you do it. It's kind of the same with drill design. You just have to tell people you're a drill designer, and they're like, all right, I guess you can do my show. And I somehow convinced 4 schools to let me write their shows that summer. And so I started in '94, and it just kind of picked up from there. And I ended up going and working on the visual staff of Phantom Regiment for a couple years. I met Brian Mason when I was out at UNOV getting a graduate degree, and he was teaching regiment at the time, and he brought me along and a couple other guys I was at UNOV with, and I was kind of the foot tech for the drum line while I was at regiment. And then from there, I taught middle school and high school in Texas. I taught down just outside of Corpus Christi for a couple of years. And I taught just middle school in Austin for a year. And that was right about the time I started toying with the idea of becoming a comedian. And while I was in Austin, there was a comedy club in town that was teaching a stand-up comedy class, and I loved it since I was a kid. I watched Johnny Carson when I was in high school. I had a tiny little TV in my bedroom, and I'd sit up and watch Johnny Carson, which ages me quite a bit. But I used to see stand-up comics on Carson, and I'd loved it since then. And I was kind of at that point. I was teaching, and I was married, and it was one of those things I kind of knew if I didn't try it then, it probably wouldn't happen. So I took the class, and I wasn't good, but I loved it, and it just became sort of a hobby where I kept doing it. And almost like anything in life, if you do it long enough and get decent at it, someone will start paying you to do it. So at the time, that's kind of when I'd been writing a few shows in the summer and teaching, but I kind of put the math together and decided I could probably make my living writing, designing band shows in the summer. And then I would have, 9 months off to try to become a comedian. And that's the same schedule I work on today, now 20 years later.
Right.
I used to take the entire summer off to write drill. I've gotten to the point where I can kind of juggle the two. I can be on the road and I can still write drill because, for comedy, you start work at 8 o'clock at night and you're done by midnight. So I sleep in a little in the morning, and then I get up and write some drill during the day. But yeah, for a long time, I would take the whole summer off and just do drill, and then just do comedy, starting in September through the end of May.
Mm-hmm.
But so I stopped teaching. We moved to North Carolina, and then we were in North Carolina for a few years, and decided to move to New York City to kind of make a serious run at comedy, because you don't get famous at comedy living in Greensboro, North Carolina. So
You're telling me it's not that big there?
yeah, there was a comedy club there for a little while, but you don't get discovered in North Carolina. So we moved to New York City, and we've been here since November of 2007. So about 13 years now.
Wonderful. Well, so juggling, since you're doing comedy and designing in the summer, how do you juggle those late night oh craps? how do you get into those? Because for most designers, the prime design time is between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., it feels like.
Yes. You know what? I ended up sort of trading myself to keep more normal hours.
Okay.
Because also, you know, I have a 6-year-old now, and he doesn't care about my schedule or how late I stay up. So yeah, I ended up, and there was one summer, I was probably out of my mind, but I took on 25 shows, and I believe I ended up calculating it about 100 days in a row without a day off. And
wow.
What happened is every day started turning into about 24 hours and 15 minutes. Every day I would stay up just a little bit later and a little bit later and a little bit later. And my wife was keeping the same schedule with me. So there got to be a point in the summer where we were eating dinner at like 3 or 3:30 in the morning. And then we would go to bed and sleep till 11 or whatever. And the clock just kept shifting by about 15 minutes every day until we finally said, we just have to stay up and force ourselves back onto the same schedule. But that was probably the last summer that I let everything just kind of get so crazy. And now, you know, after having done it this long, I can keep myself on a pretty normal schedule.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said you did 25. What's that sweet spot number for juggling your schedule?
I did probably, I can't remember. I think somewhere between 13 and 15 last year. And that's pretty good for me. That still, you know, come August gets a little crunch timing, gets busy. But 25 was insane. And
yeah,
I was having a hard time.
I can't imagine that.
You get the emails and the phone calls, and you're trying to make adjustments here. You're like, who was that for? And yeah, that was definitely too many.
I understand that. Well, we have Eddie says hi. He says he worked with one of your shows at Williams High School. He said he was merely a staff member in the woodwind section.
No one's merely a staff member.
We have a question here. Jeremy asks, what is your setup for writing drill while on the road?
I take all my folders. I keep all the schools in folders, and all the music and everything, and just take it with me. And honestly, what I like to do is I will go and find a library on the road. And for whatever reason, I love working in libraries. Like last summer, I remember sitting in the Minneapolis Public Library for 4 or 5 days, and it was beautiful. I actually loved it there. But I take my laptop. I generally, every time I buy a laptop, I buy whichever one has the biggest screen, because I've just gotten addicted to big giant screens and for writing drill. So every time I get a monitor or a laptop, I get the one with the biggest screen possible. But yeah, I just I'll park myself in a library and sit there with headphones on and drill through the day. And about 3 or 4 o'clock, I'll pack it up and go try to grab a nap and get ready for the show.
Do you do all of your scores and everything in paper, or have you swapped to digital with an iPad? I know we've discussed that with a couple other panelists before.
You know what? I'm still a little bit old school with that. I still like printing out the scores and keeping all my notes written down. But I have started kind of toying with the idea of digital. It would be easier to keep up with and those sorts of things. But I'm the same way with comedy. I still write jokes on a yellow pad with a pen. And then
don't fix it if it ain't broke.
Right. Yeah. I transfer everything to digital later, but I'm just kind of an old school guy with both of those. Although Pieware being completely digital and not old school with pen and paper certainly gave me a career.
Yes. Great. We have a question from Brantley. When are you going to be back in Arkansas again?
I know Brantley. Brantley was at JMU with me.
Yes, sir.
I was just telling Dustin right before we jumped on this, I was actually supposed to be in Arkansas this weekend, but it is currently postponed, and I will let you know when I'm coming back.
Great. We have a question from Eddie. What are your thoughts when designing in terms of transitions from one idea to another? Is there something that you normally do? How do you handle that when you're going from big idea to big idea?
Honest, that's what I do is I keep the big ideas in my head, and I work far enough ahead in the score to know where I want to be. And then the in-betweens is just making sure that happens as clean as possible.
Right.
If that makes sense.
We have in the past couple of episodes, we've had some other panelists on. How often do you write backwards?
Often. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do. I almost always write backwards from the first impact. That's my favorite place to write backwards. And that's always fun because it's the most freedom you have with the design. You're completely unencumbered. It's the clean slate. You set up the first impact however you want it, and then you get to back your way out of it. And without any constraints at all, you end up wherever you end up. But yeah, I love writing backwards. Great. And which Pieware has made that extremely easy for us to do.
Well, I have a question for you.
Okay.
How much inspiration do you garner from drill design for your comedy and vice versa? Comedy to your drill design?
You mean like the crossover?
The crossover, yes.
That's an interesting question. I've written jokes about being in marching band, and they kind of apply to drum corps, but marching band is the general thing that everyone understands, even if they weren't in it.
Right.
So marching band and drum corps has certainly influenced my comedy, but I don't think I can't say that comedy has influenced the drill design.
You never know.
Yeah, that's true. I could. You always hear about people sneaking some sort of symbolism into a show. It would be interesting to try to sneak a joke in. I did have years ago, I had a school that wanted to, they were doing a show based on Japanese warriors, and they wanted me to spell something out in Japanese. And I talked them out of it because I was like, first of all, it's hard enough for these kids to hit, a block set, much less spell something out in some Asian language that they don't understand. But that certainly would have been a good place to sneak a joke in.
Exactly. We have a question from Key Poulan. What are your most frustrating moments caused or moments caused by other designers? Wind, percussion, or color guard?
Um, I I guess I've at times had uh, wind arrangers who didn't seem to understand that if you took out 8 bars, it kind of after the fact, after drill has been written, we don't want these 4 bars here. We're going to cut those. Well, you've created a massive problem because drill occurs in time and space, and you just took away a whole bunch of time, and we don't live in a universe where you're allowed to do that. So
right, we can't teleport yet.
yeah, that's probably, but that that only happens when the wind arranger hasn't thought fully through it, or you may after the fact they're like, it's taken too long to get to this impact. Now a lot of times it can be fixed, but that's probably the hardest thing to fix after the fact.
Right. We have a question from Eddie. Tony, do you take your comedy from one impact point to a higher impact point, and how does that draw to your writing of drill?
Yes, the comedy works the same way as drill, where you have impact points, and there is a flow to a comedy show where you want to start high, you want to finish slightly higher. They always say open with your second best joke and close with your best joke, which sometimes thematically it doesn't work that way. You're juggling a little bit there. But yeah, there is a flow from getting from here to here. There's always going to be a little bit of a dip, and you kind of want to know where that dip is, even in comedy. And the same with designing a band show. You kind of change the mood and the emotions, and as a comedian, the emotion is always laughs,
right,
or almost always laughs. But there is a flow to it that you kind of aiming for.
Great.
That's a good question.
We have some people wanting to contact you. What would be a good way for them to get in touch with you?
Oh, I have a website that I neglect terribly. But my comedy website's the easiest one to find me, and my email is just tony@tonydeyo.com.
Great. We have a message or a question.
I'll type that in the comments myself.
Right. From Louis. What do you do for writer's block, whether it be writer's block for drill design or comedy?
I don't believe in writer's block. After this many years, when I was younger, I did, and but at some point, you've got to tell yourself you're just making excuses. Right. There's always a way to think your way out of it, and with comedy, I'm sort of lucky. I've been in both of these careers long enough that I know my way out of problems. But for comedy, at least, if I am having trouble writing something new, I go back and fix something old, because there's always a way to make a joke a little bit better, and there's always a way to make a transition a little bit better. And oddly, works with drill too, and writing shows. You can always keep tweaking and making things better. At some point you have to call an end to it and send it off. But yeah, I guess the short answer is I don't believe in writer's block.
Great. Well, we have a question from Jim. He asks, did you ever figure out what to do with the flutes?
No. Have any of us? Yeah, that's from my semi-famous joke about being a marching band show designer.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Jeremy asks, what's your best Heckler story from a comedy show?
What's funny is I don't get heckled a lot as a comedian, and most comedians don't get heckled a lot. When it happens, it's generally someone has a topic that's like a trigger point, or that can upset people, or it's a topic that people are on one side or the other. Like politics is a big one, and I don't really have a lot of hecklers. I can't remember the last time that I've dealt with a heckler. Usually, if someone interrupts my show, they're just trying to be a part of the show. They're not trying to derail me or hurt the show.
Right.
I'm too easygoing and nice of a guy on stage. Everyone knows I'm there just trying to make people laugh. So it's I don't get heckled a lot, which I'm thankful for.
That's awesome.
That's not really a skill I've developed real well, which, if it happens, then I'm in trouble, but it doesn't happen very often.
Well, along the lines of heckling, how do you take input from multiple people on the design staff? Do you try to funnel it through one person, or how do you handle if there's too many cooks in the kitchen, as it were?
I generally try to funnel it through the band director and the guard designer. I would almost prefer to work with the guard person because we speak a similar language, and you take all the input from the band director as well. But if the drill writer and the guard writer are kind of on the same page, and I'm making putting the winds and percussion in a good place and keeping the guard person happy, then generally everyone's going to be happy.
Right. Great. So I have a question.
Okay.
Being when you're on the road and you've delivered some shows, how do you deal with rewrites that might be outside of that area based on what they're getting back from the judges?
I don't know that if it's possible. I don't work with a lot of super competitive bands. I've worked with a few over the years, but I don't get a ton of rewrite requests. But when I do, it's generally kind of after the season's gotten started. I'm not that busy, so I've got time to deal with it. And I'm happy to do whatever I can. Short of, I remember years ago, I had a school. They were marching at a tempo. I suggested they go in halftime. They insisted they not march in halftime. And then after the show was done, they were like, "Hey, I think you were right. We need to do this in halftime." I was like, I don't know that I can. I mean, we're going to cut down 50% of this tune and try to make them end up in a similar place to move on. So that was probably the toughest rewrite I've ever had to do.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
We have another question here. As a front ensemble member, what are your thoughts or feelings with having the front ensemble on the field?
I've done it a lot, and it tends to work well. And it's funny, when it sort of first started happening and people started requesting it, I always felt like it was going to get in the way of me writing a good show, because we're putting this giant group of people on the field that takes up a big area that I can't use very well.
Right.
And it has always happened that the constraints have made the show better. And I've found that over and over in my career with props and things. Even to this day, as soon as I hear about whatever giant props they want to fit, I'm like, I roll my eyes. And then it does end up making me more creative. Right. And the same thing happens in comedy when you have to, the best example is I'm a pretty clean comedian. I work without touching on topics that, you don't want your kids to hear, or I try not to swear too much or whatever. But when that's a good creative constraint. trying to be able to make people laugh just as much without those tricks,
Right.
kind of.
Good deal. Um, out of the shows that you write, what is the percentage of people requesting props now? Is it becoming more common, about half, or?
It's it's not quite half. I had maybe a quarter of them last year had some sorts of, whether it be the front ensemble on the field or some sorts of props that they were using.
Great. Um, so, what are your biggest inspirations for drill design? Where do you draw your creativity from?
Um, I'm a little old school. I love. I'm still a drill guy, and I know that the activity is moving a little bit away from that. But going back, all the guys that I get to watch riding for cadets, like Mark Sylvester, and I'm gonna forget his name. I feel bad. The guy that came after Sylvester was amazing, and Michael Gaines and Pete Weber and all those guys that could, to me, they made magic happen. You could watch it over and over and still not figure out what they were doing. And Pete Weber especially just had this way of making long phrases just so unbelievable to watch. You're like, how did he take everyone and do all of that over this long phrase and do it so artistically? Those are the guys that inspired me, and I still try to write that way. I haven't completely gone to the staging. It feels like shows are, you stage people here and they play a thing, and then you move them over here and they play a thing, and that, as a drill writer, hurts my heart to see some of that. But I understand the art has to evolve and we have to change. We can't do the same thing, or we'd still be marching like they did in the 70s. There was people that hated what Zingali did, and they're like, he's ruining this. And that ended up being, for me, such a great change in drum corps and the marching arts.
Great. Is there anything outside of drill design or marching that you grab ideas from for drill design? Like, being in New York, having access to Broadway, do you see shows and take anything from that, or?
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Jeff Sacktig. Yes, that's the name I was looking for. I should be ashamed of myself, but I'm getting older. I read somewhere recently that our ability to remember names peaks at like 23 or something. So since that's so far behind me, I don't beat myself up too much over the names. I love, being in New York, we have access to so much art. And I've started taking my son to some museums to just see art and start introducing that to him. And I love going to Broadway. I finally got to see Hamilton back in the fall, and Wicked I saw a few years ago. All of those shows are incredible to me. And I don't know that I can pick out the things that influence me, but I do think that just being immersed in art informs what you do.
Great. We have a question from John. On average, how long does it take you to write an average band show?
I've had different speeds over the years, and when I had to write so many shows, I was really good at becoming a machine and cranking them out. And you don't necessarily want to get to a point where you're like, I have to get through 20 pages today, or I have that many to add on to tomorrow. That once you start taking on that much, you're kind of, it's too much pressure.
Right.
So I at this point, if I can get out 12 to 15 pages a day, that's a good day for me. And it's one that I don't have to work from sun up to sundown to make that happen. And I do kind of try to schedule out the summer so that everything fits into, I know when this show's due and I know when this show's due, and this is how far ahead of time I have to start to make that happen.
Understood. For prepping your drill design and getting information from the directors, what do you normally request from them? Do you have like a production sheet that you send to them that you want them to fill out? What type of information do you require from them in order to get started? And do you go out on location to see them at all?
Not, I don't get out to see them very often anymore. Just because once I finish up writing, I'm back into comedy as soon as possible. And I don't really have like any sort of template or production sheet that I make them fill out, because over the years I've had schools as far on each end of the spectrum as you could be, as far as planning and what they need. I have schools that are like, here's the music, here's my numbers, I will see you in August.
Right.
And then I have schools that do want to have a ton of input. So I kind of let them decide, how much information they want to give me. And usually when they're on that end of the spectrum where they have a lot of requests, and then they have their own system. So I just let them give me whatever system they have and work from there.
And just flex with them.
Yeah.
Understood. We have a question from Sean. Do you find yourself repeating moves often, and what's your best advice on how to avoid this? Whether it be from show to show or group to group.
Yeah, I have over the years, I've had usually, and it ends up being things I've seen, like I love the way that works, and I've replicated it myself, usually, with a different set of numbers or whatever. And but I try not to repeat them in any one year, like not because the schools are going to see each other. If I have a school in Oregon and a school in Virginia and a school in Texas, I could write that same move for everybody. Especially like a opening impact type thing. But I also feel like I can be a little more creative than that. So if I write it once for somebody in the summer, I'm like, all right, that's enough. And there's, with the number of kids we have on the field, there's a gazillion possibilities of what to do. So you've got plenty of ways to be creative if you want to.
Understood. Out of the groups that you write for, are you working with primarily groups that have custom arrangements, or do you have most that are doing box arrangements?
It does feel like for me, it's a lot of custom arrangements these days. And I don't know if that's similar across the board. I do still have a few schools that have stock arrangements, but that's just the situation they're in, and that what works for them. But I'd probably about 80% of the schools that I write for have custom music.
Understood. Are those groups available to where you can have the arrange or rewrite a section if needed to fit your drill, or vice versa?
I've only a few times in my career asked if I could have a little more time, and usually people have been great about that. They're like, yeah, no problem at all. Like, but I tend to be the guy, I make like what I'm doing fit the music without too much rewriting on their part.
Right. Do you find yourself being a production manager at all, or are you normally just the drill writer? Because we have we have people that are kind of all over the spectrum. Have you done all of that, and what do you prefer?
I have not done all that, and I don't know if maybe my career had not included comedy, if I would have started leaning more towards the kind of umbrella production guy where I'm coordinating everything. But just the way my these two careers I've tried to juggle, I'm just a drill guy, and that's what I'm comfortable with. I don't know if things would have been different had I not had this love of comedy, but writing the drills what I'm good at, and I'm okay just doing that.
Understood. Awesome. Do we have any other questions for Tony? Another question: are you able to get out and see any drum corps at all?
Yes, I living in New York. We have a few shows around here. I get to Allentown as much as I can. But yeah, that's I don't get to as many as I'd like to see. I would love to be able to see 10 of them every summer, but just sort of when you're in that writing mode, it ends up being hard to take the night off or the day off and go see the drum corps. But I still love going out to watch it.
Right. We have a question from John. What is your favorite pieware tool?
It's interesting. That's actually a good question. And I don't know if I do this weird or I have a buddy of mine that we both write drill during the summer, and for whatever reason, we have two completely different ways of using pieware. And my favorite tool is I don't even know if I know the name of it, but I use it every single page almost.
The Morph Tool.
The Morph Tool. I use the Morph Tool from page 1 till page end. And for whatever reason, he doesn't. He redraws every page. And I think that's insane. Because the Morph Tool has given me so many good ideas over the years by just dragging ends and pulling things in the middle. And you can come up with the most beautiful curves and forms just by playing with it. And I've never convinced him to use it, which you can tell me, Dustin, like, who's the normal one there? It's me, right?
Well, I'm going to give the answer that Pi would give. He doesn't know why everybody doesn't use the Morph Tool.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right. Okay, good.
So how's that?
I'll take that.
So we have a question from Roberto. What's your method for incorporating the guard staging?
I've learned over the years to take the advice of the guard designer, and if you can make them happy, it makes your life easier. And now sometimes it's difficult because I do still feel like my job is to make sure the musicians are heard. And you sometimes run into guard designers who feel like the band should be the backing ensemble for a winter guard show on a marching band field. So sometimes it's tough, and sometimes you have to fight those little battles. But it feels like the pendulum has swung a little bit where, at least in my career, everyone's a little more willing to kind of bend on a few things here and there to make it best for everyone.
Right. We have a question from John. Do you spend a lot of time making the visuals and pathways to get the video just right? And do you send videos or do you send drills out?
I send both. I don't spend a lot of time getting like moving cameras and all those things. Because to me, sort of the most useful video view is kind of just the animation from a fairly high point, kind of where you would like to be able to teach it from and what you're going to see from up there. Now, I love moving around and seeing it from every different angle that's possible just for my own fun. But when I send it out, I just send a kind of not exactly blimp from above, but kind of press box view of what the drill is going to look like.
Texas press box view, as it were.
Exactly.
How often do you put all of the visuals in, or do you flesh out full visuals, or is it only just kind of hit points for the guard, or?
Do you mean like
body visuals and flag visuals, anything like that? Do you take the time to put that in, or no?
Body, I will tend to know where it should happen, and I will generally say, have your guard person write the body for this, but this is where it should be.
Right.
Sometimes I'll have an idea, and I'll include that, but I do leave that to a visual person on their staff.
Right. Do you find yourself with the mobile apps making the pathways exact if you're wanting to take them a curved pathway, or something that you might have to have multiple subsets to create the visual effects you're looking for?
Yes. I do try to clean that up as much as possible. And it's honestly for me not thinking towards people using the mobile apps, but just for a band director who's going to watch this, the animation of the drill.
Right.
I want them to see it happen the way I see it in my head. And, I mean, I've been doing this for, over 2 decades. It's hard for me to look at paper and imagine, especially when we get used to all of the animation that's available to us in Pyware, that whatever ability I once had to be able to look at 2 sheets of paper and know where it's going, that left me a long time ago because I don't need it anymore. I can watch it. So I do spend a lot of time making subsets if I need to and being as clear as possible, because a long time ago in my career, I went and taught a show that I wrote that, or I went to teach a camp after it had been taught. And I saw that I wasn't clear on the drill and in the instructions. And when I got there, it was a mess. And I knew it was my fault. So kind of from that point on, I've tried to figure out all the places it will be complicated and make it as clear as possible.
Great. We have a question from Sean. From the directors that you work with, do you find they mostly prefer coordinates or full-page drill charts or drill books? What do they prefer? What do you normally send out in the ways of that?
I send everything. I even used to, up until just a couple of years ago, I'd print a very large version of it and get it bound and send that stuff out. But the feedback I've gotten over the years is it's just a trinket and nobody uses it. So it was too much work to keep doing it. So I don't do that anymore. Right. But I do send everything as far as PDFs. I send the charts, I send the coordinates, and then I forget the name. You guys I call them super dot books.
Yes.
The drill books. Yes. Those things are incredible. And I send them just on the off chance that once a year I can convince a school to use them, because I think they're amazing.
It's wonderful when you have people that need to step in for alternates or anything like that, if you're not using it for the whole school. So.
Yep. Yeah, those things are incredible.
We have a question from Jeremy. How frequently do you rotate your content in and out of your comedy show?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm always writing, although during quarantine, it's felt somewhat useless because I haven't been able to be on stage in a few months. But I'm when life is normal, I write every day, and I try to do a few new things every single night on stage. I even have a place in my act where I just tell the audience I'm gonna try new jokes, and that always works well because they like sort of being a part of the process of creating, and it takes the pressure off me. You know, a joke can bomb and it doesn't matter because I told them it was new. And I get to constantly try new things. I probably at this point I'm recording a new album every couple of years, so I try to come up with about 20 to 25 new minutes every year. But that's kind of the turnover rate for me.
Great. Awesome. So you said you had a 6-year-old son. Is he showing interest in marching band and or comedy?
He's leaning towards comedy. He's a very funny little kid, and actually named him Carson after Johnny Carson.
Awesome.
So once a year we go to Rockefeller Center. I mean, we're there more than once a year, but they have this giant mural in Rockefeller Center with all the NBC stars over the years, and conveniently Johnny Carson's near the bottom corner. So I always take a picture of my son standing next to the mural with Johnny.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Fun. Well, do we have any other questions for tonight for Tony before we sign off? It's been a wonderful time talking with you, Tony.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah. It's fun to see how the two things interact. It's interesting.
I've been sort of very lucky in that comedy itself always slows down in the summer. A lot of comedy clubs are very slow in the summer, except in, you know, sort of touristy beach towns. They'll have a comedy club that's doing well in the summer, but there's not many of those. It's just when the weather's nice outside, people want to be outside.
Exactly.
So comedy and drill writing have dovetailed so perfectly, and you know, being able to write drill in the summer and have the freedom of most of the rest of the year off has, like, drill gave me my comedy career, really. Which, it's, I always credit drill writing with my comedy career, because I was always making a living writing band shows. I never had to do the thing that most comedians do, where they have to give up the day job and starve for 3 or 4 years trying to, and I never had to do that, which I feel a little guilty about, but not really.
We have a couple of questions here. We've got,
okay.
How much do you animate for your clients? I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you write a ripple or a flutter step development, do you actually write every point of that out?
Those things I don't usually. If I have the time or if I feel it's going to help, but the things that I feel like are just as easily explained without me going to the trouble of making all of it happen for the video, I'll usually just explain it. But if for some reason, you know, that I think it's going to make it clear or easier to teach, then I will.
Great. Okay. Key has a question. With your skill in percussion, how has that helped you in your comedy timing?
You know what? I credit my musical background with my comedy timing. I get that comment at least once after every single show. Someone says your timing is impeccable. And I do feel like being a musician, and not necessarily, I mean, you know, a percussionist especially, but just being a musician, I can adjust jokes, because there's always a perfect time to start talking again after a laugh is dying off. You don't wait till it gets to 0. You don't start, like, when they're really laughing, you don't talk over top of them. because you can teach an audience not to laugh. If they're laughing and you're talking, they'll start clamping down on the laughs, and by the end of the show, you've taught them not to laugh. So there's a perfect time in the laugh dying out where you start talking again, and that's different for every joke, every single show. It's the timing changes based on how big the audience is, how well the show is going, and that being able to pick that spot, I credit to my master's degree in percussion. It's the only way I can sleep at night.
I understand that.
Spend that much money on a music education.
Looks like we have one last question.
Okay.
It's a burning question for most designers this year. Have you had any bands cancel their season yet for this year?
Yes, I have. Most are kind of in a wait and see. They're not sure yet, but I've had 2 so far tell me that if they do anything at all, it's going to be just almost a like block type thing where they're not going to drill. So yeah, a couple have canceled. So far, everyone's kind of wait and see.
Yeah. I know we just received UIL here in Texas that you can start some sort of practice on June 8th. So with some...
Are they... Now, usually it's beginning of August, right?
Well, it's giving the guidelines of what you can do for any summer anything.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Practicing 10 feet apart.
Wow.
So
it's going to be a weird year.
Yes. Well, Tony, thank you for coming on tonight. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. It's been a great fun. Hope to get out to see one of your shows when you start touring again.
Yes. Everyone, please come see me tell jokes.
Come see me. Again, Tony at TonyDeyo.com.
Yes.
So swing by his website.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much, Dustin. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.